Okay, good afternoon and welcome everybody to another social emotional workshop where today's topic will be human trafficking and online safety and support. We are going to be receiving this presentation from Palguna and Murkov. Did I say it right?
You got it.
Yay! And they're from the Michigan Coalition, and they're going to be giving this presentation today. Ladies, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tony, and others. It's so nice to be in space with everybody. We hope we have the opportunity to get to know a little bit about folks that are in space together. And just very quickly, my name is Markab. I'm the Associate Director at the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. And we are a coalition, meaning we are a group of organizations. We have 70 plus members in our coalition. And these are organizations and agencies that are located throughout Michigan. And their primary work is to support survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking. And with me, I have my wonderful colleague, Palguna, who I will give a moment to just introduce herself and tell a little bit about what she does.
Hi, everyone. My name is Falguna, and I use she, her pronouns. I also work with Markab at the Coalition, and I work as a senior program manager for the nonprofit management program. And I offer support to the agencies that are our member programs across the state.
Awesome. Thank you. So we want to know just a little bit about who folks are in space. I see everyone has written their names. Before I move on, I'm sorry, I also use she and her pronouns. If you could just maybe share your name, your pronouns, and one thing you hope to learn today. And we can just do very quick, like a popcorn. I'm not going to call on anybody, believe it or not. I'm an introvert, so I don't want to do that to anybody. So if we can, I see we've got a few participants, so we'll just take some time and just go through. So anyone who wants to start?
My name is Gwen Grace, and I would like to learn how I can help someone that's been through a traumatic experience. I can't say I know how you feel. So what kind of things can I do and where can I send them?
Awesome. Thank you, Gwen.
Okay, I can go next. My name is Famia Hamden. What I'm hoping to learn today is how to recognize any signs of someone who might be going through this, and then what to do, what to look out for.
Appreciate you. Thank you, Fahmia.
You're welcome.
My name is Michelle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm hoping to just learn more about human trafficking in general.
Thank you, Michelle.
My name is Kelly Clifton, and yeah, me too. I want to learn more about it in general and how I can best help my students and my own children.
Thank you, Kelly.
Hi, my name is Rosanna Madigan, and like most of us, I would like to learn more and also just be able to recognize if there's any signs to help me notice anything so that if my children or students need help, I'm able to help them.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Rosanna.
Hi, my name is Anna Mason, and I go by she and her as pronouns. I'm just hoping to get an update. I've had some training before in human trafficking, and I just want to see if anything's new, where we've come with it, that type of thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna.
Hi, my name is Susan, and I go by she and her also. And I would just like to learn about this topic in general.
Thank you, Susan.
My name is Stephanie Tersha. I also would just like to learn more about human trafficking. I'm not really familiar with it, so this is one of my first like encounters with learning about it. So I'm curious to see what is in store.
Awesome. Welcome, Stephanie. Got a few more. Anyone up to introducing themselves?
I will. My name is
Caitlin Malozek.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
Sarah, will maybe let Caitlin continue, and then Sarah will.
Absolutely, sure.
Awesome.
So my name is Caitlin Malozek. I go by she and her. And I'm just looking forward to gaining a better understanding of human trafficking. I have, I don't know that much about it, but I'm eager to learn more.
Welcome, Caitlin. Sarah?
Hi, my name is Sarah Stratz, and I am just here to also learn more about it. And hopefully, if I could learn the signs.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, my name is Maria Romaine, and I am hoping to learn the signs of human trafficking, especially as it relates to me working with students every day. I'm also hoping to learn, like, possibly what's being done about this. You know, we get a lot of coverage about the pandemic and whatever else is going on in the country, but I personally don't feel like a lot of people are talking about, like, what's being done. Are they going after these, children to help them? So that's just where I am with it, hoping to learn something.
Thank you, Maria.
My name is Shirley Pike. Sorry, I popped in late. I'm not sure what
That's okay.
She and her is all about, but I've been to another seminar on human trafficking, but it's been a few years. So I just want to see if things are relatively the same, or if there's, new perspectives and new things to learn.
Sure. Thank you, Shirley. And the she and her are pronouns. When at the coalition, we like to invite people into space and share what pronouns they would like us to use to identify them.
Oh, it doesn't matter to me.
Appreciate you. I think, Kate, we haven't heard from you.
Yeah, I wanted to go last.
Okay.
I'm Kate Narlock. I was just gonna bounce off of Maria was saying. I'm really curious to hear what's being done with the issues going on, and just like generic things I can share for online safety with my students, signs, resources for human trafficking. I'm excited.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. Did everybody have an opportunity to introduce themselves?
Nope, I was gonna make Kate second from last because
right. I wasn't gonna disappoint her. I was gonna say, well, you're second from last, but
my name's Joe Galino, pronouns he, him, his. And just like everybody, I kind of want to recognize so I know if it's happening in my own communities, is it happening just around me, just to identify it, and solutions on how to prevent it.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Awesome. I think that's everybody who had an opportunity. Tony, would you like an opportunity to please introduce? I think you are the person that everybody knows, but if you would like the opportunity to introduce yourself and maybe share what you hope to learn.
Well, again, everybody, I'm Tony Kirton, and I was sharing earlier that I became aware of human trafficking about 3 or 4 years ago when I brought the first workshop regarding human trafficking to ATS. And I was just completely blown away because I had no idea that this was going on. And so once I heard it, it is a passion for me to bring awareness to everyone, staffers, students, everyone, because it is, as Maria said, an area that is underexposed, but is massively abundant throughout our country. And the more of us that can be aware of it and bring awareness to it, the more we can put an end to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. I really thank you, everybody. I hear resoundingly that, you know, in this space are people who care for young people, care for other people, and equipping ourselves with the knowledge of understanding the dynamics of human trafficking are really some of the first steps that we take, right, in understanding human trafficking. Palguna and I don't have all the answers, right? Our expertise and experience comes from having worked with survivors of trafficking and sexual violence and domestic violence for many, many years. It is work that we are passionate about, and we recognize that in an hour, there's only so much that we can share. So we hope to share some foundational things that will hopefully make folks curious to learn some more and to reach out some more and do some more digging and some more education. And also the opportunity to engage with the coalition and the information that we have around trafficking. So I hope this is an ongoing educational endeavor for all of us. Palguna and I continue to learn about trafficking from survivors and from others because it's a never-ending knowledge base, right? There's just every day is something, you can learn something new, right? Every day understanding something that broadens your perspective on trafficking. And so I want folks not to leave here after an hour thinking they know everything, right? Because that's not going to happen, but maybe that spark that curiosity for folks to learn a little bit more. Before we start, I do want to maybe set some grounding for us. And there's a wonderful image on here. And it's Audre Lorde, Palguna will maybe share that slide, who talks a lot, if you don't know, Audre Lorde talks a lot about self-care, right? And so self-care is really intentionally taking care of yourself. And so one of the things we recognize when we enter a space like this is that there are survivors amongst us. There are survivors of domestic violence. There are survivors of sexual violence, and perhaps survivors of human trafficking in our space today. And so what we're asking is that it's really important that if you are a survivor, to know that some of the things we're going to talk about may be triggering to you. If you are not a survivor or know someone who has survived violence, some of the things that we talk about may also be difficult and challenging to hear, because we will be talking about sexual violence, we will be talking about harm, we will be talking about violence, and we'll be also talking about things that I call the ists and isms of the world. Racism, sexism, homophobia, and things like that, which tie into trafficking. And so please, I want everyone to just take a minute and sit with that information, and then just maybe take a few seconds to think about what are some ways that if you hear something here and that make you uncomfortable or harm you, what are some things that you can do for yourself to care for yourself. So we want to, before we move into that, we want to give folks just a few seconds to think about that, and I'll be quiet as folks think about that. Awesome. So we also want to be as accessible as possible. So if there are any questions or anything like that, please note that Falguna will put them in chat. So if you are, if you prefer to read questions, they will also be in chat. If you prefer to respond to a question in chat, you may also do so. We know that learning through Zoom can be, we all have different learning styles, right? So utilize whatever ways that you need to communicate so that we can have good interaction. I like to joke, but it's true, that Falguna and I are probably two of the biggest introverts at the coalition. And together, we would probably have you all do group activities so we didn't have to talk so much, but that's not going to happen. However, We do hope that this will be as interactive as possible. This is a conversation. This is not a lecture style. I have a teenage son who thinks that I lecture him a lot. I probably do, but that's not what I want. We would like for this to be a conversation for us to exchange ideas. And so please engage as much as you can in whatever way that you can and ask questions when they come up. Falcona, can we see the next slide? All right, so pop quiz. What percentage of teens do you think have smartphones in the United States? Teens 13 to 17. This is
98%.
98%. Thank you, Gwen. Any other?
I would say 90.
90%. We see some
85.
60s, 85, 75s, 80s. The question is, what percentage of teens 13 to 17 have smartphones? 80. All right, so we've got anything from 60 to 98%. So 89% of teens have their own smartphone, right? And so here's what we know is that research, statistics and studies, information can be gathered and disseminated and shared based on what people are looking for. So yes, some of this research is flawed. And this doesn't count non-smartphones and it doesn't count shared phones, right? Shared phones with siblings is very common, or family phones. So this is just teens who have their own phones. And these statistics come from both the CDC and Futures Without Violence if folks are interested. All right, how many times, what percentage of teens do you think say they use social media more than once a day? This is a tough one. More than once a day, 90, yeah. Okay, so we see 80s and 90s. This study said 70% of teens use social media more than once a day. This does not include, though, other apps like YouTube or other streaming apps or other platforms where they can still engage with people, like gaming apps and things like that. It's strictly social media apps, right? So this is where some of this research is not as nuanced as we think, because just based on my own teenager, I think he talks more when he's playing video games than he is on Snapchat or any of those things, right? So 70%. So recently we started looking into social media apps, and far and large Snapchat and Instagram is where it's at for younger folks. You know, a long time ago, it used to be Facebook. Most young people think Facebook. I think this study, when teens were asked, what do you use Facebook for? The consensus was to talk to my grandparents or my parents or some other thing. So over the years, how social media is being used, the type of apps, right? So Snapchat, if you think about those features of Snapchat, right? The ability for a message to be sent and then disappearing, right? Instagram, where it's mostly pictures and less writing. So thinking about these, Facebook is, and a few years ago, when we trained, we would talk about Facebook as being the most influential app, but now it's between Instagram and Snapchat. If you don't know what those apps are, I really, really encourage you to do some research and understand some of their features and their dynamics and how they work. Unfortunately, we also see statistics like 1.5 million high school boys and girls in the US admit to being intentionally hit or physically harmed in the last year by someone they were romantically involved in. And I can bet that is very underreported, particularly around boys, just because of the way we socially normalize boys to think about violence and abuse, right? And some of this things, typically how boys are normed are, you know, in a very macho, very, we don't share feelings kind of way. And so in that way, it leads us to believe that some of these statistics could be much lower or less reported than we know. And 1 in 3 young people will be in an abusive or unhealthy relationship. And then, so unhealthy relationship is broadly defined, right? It could be a relationship that someone has experienced physical, verbal, emotional abuse, economic abuse, any one of those abuses. So the reason I share these statistics is not to, you know, for us to go back and forth around, is it higher or lower, but to give us a scope, right? Young people are experiencing harm in relationships. And many young people find sense of community in virtual land, right? Those two things are connected, right? They're connected because how we talk about healthy relationships in this day and age for young people cannot happen without talking about a virtual or online communities and in real life communities. And often young people are experiencing both, sometimes with 2 sets of friends or people, and sometimes they're interlinked. What is happening in real life sometimes translates to online or virtual sort of life, and vice versa. And sometimes it's 2 separate communities. And so I want us to think critically around some of the dynamics, right? And what happens when young people, or when we are creating relationships online and when we are creating relationships in person. How are those things the same, and how might those things be different, right? Certainly the anonymity of online is huge, and anonymity of in person is very limited, right? So that's one of the differences we can see. But more often when we talk to young people, sense of belonging, the need of a sense of belonging for both online and in real life is urgent for young people. The need to feel a sense of belonging is a priority for many, many young people who have shared, both survivors who are young people, as well as what our research tells us around young people. All right, so keep that in mind as we move forward. All right, can we go to our next slide, Palguna? All right, so if you have a piece of paper, or if you just want to think of it, we introduced this image to different training groups for us to start thinking about people as whole people, right? So take some time and think about 2 or 3 ways that you would identify yourself, 2 or 3 identifying words for you. For example, I am female identifying, I am heterosexual, and I'm Black. Those are my 3 ways that I identify myself. They don't have to be what I used, but think about maybe 3 or 4 ways you identify yourself.
Okay, I can go. Female.
I'm sorry, Femia. We don't have to share. That's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were, okay.
Awesome. Just write it down or think about it. If you want to share, please do. But if you
okay, no problem. Sorry.
Think about, that's okay. Think about there's some things on here that can help you, but
okay.
you think about other things that might that you might want to think about. Maybe things like your income, your geographic location, your race is not on here. your income status, your family status. Everybody think about those three? Now think about how they interact with one another. Or how do they intersect or layer with one another? For example, I'll use age, right? When I was 15 years old, very hard for people to give me credibility, right? They thought, what does she know? She's 15 years old, right? She's a teenager. She's full of these raging hormones. She doesn't know what out of life. How much wisdom does she have? Now I'm in my 40s, right? And so I have a certain credibility within society, right? That I'm just wise enough to know what I'm talking about, but not that I'm out of touch or in an age, and this is according to societal norms, where I'm also in an age bracket where maybe I'm also undermined because I'm too old, right? I'm in that sweet spot, what I call the age sweet spot in our society, right? And then when I get older, I anticipate that people, because of my age, will think I know less or will want to make decisions for me, or I might not have as much agency for myself, just based on what societal norms are. So although my age has changed, how I see the world or the world treats me has changed throughout my lifetime, just based on my age. But it's not just my age, right? It's also these other identities that intersect or overlay. And it's this term that we use, it's called intersectionality. And it's a term that many people in the social justice field or social work field kind of use. It's this understanding of how do all the identities that you have, when they're layered, how do you interact with the world and how does the world interact with you based on all those identities that are layered? So think about it. If you are part of the LGBTQ community and you're 15 years old and you're gender nonconforming, how do you think you experience the world? A world that is maybe homophobic or racist or sexist, right? That's for a whole other training of why do these things exist? But we know that, can we agree that these things exist in our world, that racism, sexism, homophobia, all the other ists and isms exist in our world? Yes, no, we good with agreeing on that? So how do you, based on the identities that you have, or any other combination of identities, how do you think the world would treat you, or how does the world treat you? I explained that right now, no one really mistreats me because of my age. I can say that comfortably. But I experience sexism because of my gender. I'm giving pause so that we can think a little bit. So when we start talking about human trafficking, and especially around with young people, right? We have to start thinking of the wholeness of the person we're talking about, right? How are they experiencing the world, not only because they're of their age, right? Because they're young people, but all the other identities that they hold. Because a little bit later, we're going to see how all the ists and isms, and when I say that, I mean things like homophobia, racism, sexism, et cetera, how perpetrators of trafficking utilize some of those social norms to target and to traffic folks. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you some definitions. These are definitions that you can Google and look at. Sex trafficking is using force, fraud, or coercion to recruit, harbor, transport, obtain, or employ a person for the purpose of commercial sex act, or a commercial sex act in which a person performing the act is under 18. This is really important to remember. If someone uses force, fraud, or coercion for any of these purposes, and the person is 18, it's trafficking. As under 18, I'm sorry. It's trafficking. And we're going to see a little bit of the difference of why we're distinguishing between over 18 and under 18, because that will kind of help you understand what the law says about these. And so this is a definition, it's a legal definition. Falguna and I are not law enforcement, we're not lawyers. The reason we feel that in community, it's important to share the definition is because often the systems that are going to support trafficking survivors will use this definition to identify or decide if this person is experiencing trafficking. We also have something called labor trafficking, and a lot of people don't consider this, but young people do experience labor trafficking. And on this next slide, we're going to see the definition. It's using force, fraud, or coercion. So the same elements of force, fraud, or coercion to recruit, harbor, transport, obtain, or employ a person for labor or services in involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. This is the legal definition. And then we have a fancy schmancy chart. I think it's next, our fancy schmancy chart that makes us, help us understand, right? So this is called an AMP model, or an action, means, and purpose. Often the legal system and other helping professions will use this to kind of determine what the person is experiencing. So the way I like to think about it is, what is the action? It's recruiting or harboring or moving or obtaining a person. I added the a person to help us understand trafficking. By what? By force, fraud, or coercion. For what? Or for the purposes of involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or slavery. The asterisk says that anyone under 18 are not required to show force, fraud, or coercion if they're induced into commercial sex acts. That's not the case for labor trafficking, just sex trafficking. So if someone under 18 is experiencing labor trafficking, they have to show force, fraud, or coercion. Not the case with sex trafficking. So that's the big difference that I wanted to kind of highlight for us. Does anyone have any questions about what any of these things mean? Okay. We'll talk a little bit about what it looks like, right? Because these are just kind of definitions, and it could look differently. All right, so let's do a little fact or fiction. But before we do that, let's get an idea of what are some things you've heard about human trafficking, maybe about where it happens, how often it happens, to whom it happens. Just two or
I've always heard that it's not like a grab and go in a grocery store parking lot. It's more like coercion. They get lured into it, and then they feel like they owe their partner and they have to start paying it off by doing certain things.
Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
I've heard it's very prevalent in Michigan.
Okay, somebody heard it's prevalent in Michigan. Okay.
From what I heard, it seems like it happens most to females.
Okay.
I heard it's sometimes somebody very close to the family or a family member.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. So you all are like, sometimes that's the biggest hurdle, right? Is this idea that people think, I can't tell you, I'll tell you so many stories where people call me and say, I saw on Facebook that somebody's at the Meijer on aisle number 6 with a needle, with a syringe full of stuff and is stabbing girls in the neck and putting them to sleep and dragging them to the car. That's human trafficking. So can you go out to the Meijer and help them? So I'm not saying that can't happen, but often, right, traffickers are people that are familiar with those being trafficked, more often than not. Or there's some relationship or knowledge with one another. Very rarely do we see strangers grabbing and going, right? So that's one of the biggest factor fiction. It is fiction to think that trafficking is happening just in grab and go situations. Other myths that we kind of hear is that it's always a violent crime, and that's not it. This is probably the most pervasive myth about trafficking. That it sometimes, most often involves kidnapping or physically forcing someone. Really, more so than not, human traffickers use psychological means like manipulating or threatening or tricking or defrauding, or someone said coercing. More than physically harming someone, there is more psychological means that are being used by perpetrators. When I say perpetrators, I mean people who traffic, than any physical violence. There's also a myth that all trafficking includes commercial sex or sex. That's not true. We read that it's the use of force, fraud, or coercion to get another person to provide labor or commercial sex. So worldwide, there is more labor trafficking than there is sex trafficking. But in the US, there's more awareness of sex trafficking than there is labor trafficking for many, many reasons. And we can go into them another time. But part of that is because we as a society like sensation. We like the sensationalized movies like Taken, and who knows, I can probably name a million other things on Netflix or things like that. But it's important to also see, even among young people, is force, fraud, or coercion being used for labor trafficking? So often those are survivors that are missed by our services or missed by other people. We have myths like only undocumented foreign nationals get trafficked in the United States. So Polaris, which is a part of the National Human Trafficking Hotline, it's called the Polaris Project, and I'll put it on here if you all want to look that up. They do a lot of research on trafficking. So Polaris shares that human trafficking cases have been reported and prosecuted in industries locally, like as well as thousands of cases of trafficking involving foreign nationals who are living legally and working in the United States, and trafficking of survivors of both sexes and labor trafficking. So it doesn't lean one way or the other. And so this is not just a crime that's being experienced by illegal people that are not documented or underdocumented or foreign nationals. It's happening to all sorts of people. Or undocumented nationals, it's happening to folks with different types of documentation. Another myth is only girls and women can be victims and survivors of trafficking. There's a study that estimates that half of sex trafficking victims and survivors are male. And so this number might be higher. And we know that male survivors are far less likely to identify, right? We also know that boys and young men who are part of the LGBTQ community are particularly vulnerable when it comes to trafficking. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we believe there's also a myth that all commercial sex is human trafficking. So what we know is all commercial sex involving a minor is legally considered human trafficking. Commercial sex involving an adult is human trafficking if the person providing the commercial sex is doing so against his or her will and as a result of force, fraud, or coercion. So if it's consensual, it's not trafficking. Maybe illegal, but not trafficking. And if the trafficked person consented initially to a situation, it can't be human trafficking or against their will because they quote unquote knew better. So initial consent to something, even commercial sex or labor, even if it's not relevant if force, fraud, or coercion come into play. For example, we worked with a survivor who consented, right, to engage in work in hospitality industry, and the person engaged in the work, they went to the place, they started working. What then happened was the trafficker said to the person, well, I'm paying you half of what we agreed upon. And if you complain, I know where your mother and your brother live. There was no physical harm. There was no sexual violence. That's force, right? That's coercion. And although the person initially agreed that they would work, the fraud part comes in that they change the circumstances of their agreements. That's trafficking, right? And often when we're only looking for the person that's tied to a radiator and is sexually assaulted and has black and blue bruises, we're not able to see all survivors, right? Because this is how the media has perpetuated what a survivor looks like, right? Am I right in saying that, like, even I hate the movie Taken. It's the worst thing that's ever been made for us in the advocacy, because that's not how it happens, right? And if you ever Google sex trafficking, what are the images we see? More often, it's a younger white female, and it's depicted as somebody from an affluent or middle class area, someone that's changed to somewhere and has bruising. Yes, that can be, but that's not the norm for trafficking survivor. Often we see trafficking victims in all realms, in all spaces. So we'll move to the next slides because I want to be conscious of time. Falconer, will we go to the next slide, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. So what do traffickers look like? Let's spitball a little bit. What does our media say traffickers look like?
Middle-aged white male.
Ah, awesome. Someone like Ricky. That's okay. We can look at Ricky. The 27-year-old bachelor works at Ford and factories, romantic and loves candlelit dinner and enjoying movies at home. Maybe not he looks like a middle-aged white male in the picture. Maybe not Ricky's the narrative, but someone like Ricky, middle-aged white male. Sometimes it's middle-aged white male that's maybe less educated, not so handsome looking, maybe doesn't have a lot going in their lives, are stuck in some kind of basement somewhere. There's different narratives. Before we move on to the next picture, what are some other things? What does the world tell us traffickers look like? Joe, did you?
This is awful, but I always imagine that their grooming is lacking. I would think that this is awful, but maybe they have markings, tattoos, piercings, and it's awful that I feel that that could be what they look like, because those people also could be very nice people, but that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah. That's okay, Gwen. I appreciate that you said that. Some people are scared to say that in space. This is a non-judgment space. But yeah, someone less groomed, maybe with tattoos and piercing, unkempt. Joe?
Yeah, we're told that it's the illegal aliens or the immigrants coming here and ruin our lives. That's what we're told.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe someone who would belong to my community or Falguna's community as immigrants, brown and black males who are here with no paperwork and have bad intentions. All right, let's go to the next one. Sometimes the image is this. It's the idea of this, a pimp named Slick Black, who's a sugar daddy and enjoys shopping and spending his weekends in the club. It's often also an image, somewhat, Sarah, you said that, a pimp. Yeah. And then we've got, how about this? How about Janet? She's 32 and a mother of 2, and she works hard to provide for her family. Or how about Adrian? He's 19 and he's a high school graduate and he wants to be a rap artist. Yeah, this is a time where we're going, and Gwen, the reason, I'm glad you brought that up. The reason is, remember we went back and we started talking about those identities, right? And what they look like. And so our society has decided which identity or which person, we've put value on people, right? Based on identities. Society has decided who is more valuable than others. It's an unfortunate truth, right? But we see it, right? Who has more credibility than others? Who is more trustworthy than others? And often it is people that hold certain identities that are less trustworthy. And so we have to challenge that narrative, right? Because we have to believe that someone like Janet can also be a trafficker. Because what we know about people who traffic is, and in the next slide, we're going to see some information here for those that like to read their information. Okay, I don't know. Was there one that y'all leaned on? I don't know. We usually say A, B, C, D, but I won't make anyone pick today. But I want to say C. Let's challenge ourselves and say Janet could be the trafficker. Let's go to the next slide here, Falguna. Traffickers often have the same ethnicity or nationality or cultural backgrounds of their victims. Why? Because traffickers gain trust of those that they traffic. When you see things like the grooming process, or when you read things about traffickers groom the trafficked, right? These are nuanced and complex ideas, right? And I wouldn't even want to start to go into that. But here's the idea that I wanted to convey to us. Of all the identities of the person, right? If you experience marginalization, or if there's a gap in something in your life, or if you're experiencing a marginalization, for example, my son is 17, okay? I I'm a single parent. It's very easy for someone to see that my son, who is a Black male and maybe experiences racism in the world, and is 17 and maybe has less credibility in the world, it's so easy for somebody to see, to recognize the vulnerability that society has created for my son. His race and his age make him vulnerable because of what society thinks of his age and his race. Not because of anything he is, because how society treats him because he's 17 and he's Black and he's male. And so if he finds someone that looks like him or is from the same community or around his age, and that person gives him agency and trust and believes him, but has bad intentions, this is how grooming starts, right? Society, our societal norms are a big factor to how and why perpetrators can engage and create relationships with victims or survivors. Does that make sense? So it's the same thing with perpetrators, right? It's these same things. It's the same identities that when we think about who is less trustworthy in our society, what are the narratives that are being created by society? Then it's these pictures that are painted of who can do wrong and who doesn't do wrong. So Janet, the mother of 2 who lives in suburbia, that's not the narrative that's pictured for us, but certainly she can be a trafficker. And they can work alone or they can work in network. They can be family members, they can be boyfriends, they can be father figures, they can be teachers, they can be clergy, they can be pimps, they can be gangs, they can be social workers, they can be anything, is the point we're trying to make here. And so for the folks that talk about how can I help someone, right? It's not really by saying, who are you hanging out with and using that narrative to decide, is that person good or bad? But asking about what kind of relationship do you have with the person, right? And trying to recognize, is that a healthy relationship, right? Is it an appropriate relationship? Because I can say, what kind of relationship do you have with Falguna? Do you get to make choices in that relationship? What are the dynamics of that relationship? What do you do with your time in that relationship? That's what's going to kind of give you an idea of where's the power in that relationship, and do both of them have equal power in that relationship, or is that skewed? Because even if it's my peer and I say, well, Falguna makes all the decisions, I don't really have a say in these things, then we know there's a dynamic in that relationship that causes us to pause and ask a question, right? Not so much, are you going out with a guy that's 10 years older, 15? Yes, that's worthy of a check-in, right? But what are the elements of the relationship? Do you hear things about force, fraud, or coercion when someone is telling you the dynamics of their relationship with this person? There is no formula, right? Because if we walk out of here thinking a trafficker can only look this way or that way, we're going to miss survivors. So asking open-ended, non-judgmental questions, especially for young people. What do you do with your time with that person? How much autonomy or agency does this young person have in their life when they're engaging? What about that young person's identities could be creating vulnerability? not because the person is bad, right? But we know, if we know that perpetrators are looking for vulnerabilities, what about that young person could a perpetrator recognize as a vulnerability? Is the person housing unstable? Is the person dealing with substance use issues? So it's easy for someone to say, to come in and recognize those vulnerabilities and then give them options. Person's housing unstable, come on, I've got a couch. That's how perpetrators work, right? They gain trust and they continue to gain trust. And then they start to introduce force, fraud, and coercion into the relationship. So I know I want to be respectful of time, that it's 3 o'clock, right? And perhaps, you know, folks came into this thinking we'd have 100% formula of saying, this is how to know if this is a perpetrator, right? And this is how to know if this is a victim. There is no formula, because anybody could be a perpetrator and anybody could be a victim. You and I could be victims of trafficking, because you and I hold parts of identity that create a certain vulnerability. And so part of what I encourage you to do as people with young people in their lives is, one, let's not make the internet the worst thing in the world, right? The internet can be really helpful, right? Many teens say the internet is where they feel a most sense of community for some. Their communities are now in virtual land. We've also moved where learning is virtual, entertainment is virtual. But some of the conversations that we have to have are some of those practical conversations that I'm sure you all have talked about internet safety, right? Like not sharing your personal information and all of those things. That's excellent and great. But also understanding what are healthy relationships for the young person, and what is the relationship look like for that young person. When you hear something that sounds like force, fraud, or coercion, what do? Very rarely do I run into a survivor who comes and says to me, I'm a survivor of trafficking. I've never heard a survivor identify themselves as a survivor of trafficking. More often than not, it's when a survivor can, or sometimes doesn't identify that there is an imbalance of power in their relationship, right? Or that their relationship is harming them in some way. Open-ended, non-judgmental questions to understand, what is this person, how is this person treating you? What are they providing for you? How have things changed over time in that relationship? I wish I'm hoping someone would invite us another time to do some more conversation. I'm sure Falguna and I would love to come back and talk about it. But a good first step is believing, right? Believing that this person, what they're telling you, right? Believing that they're experiencing some kind of challenge or a change in their relationship, right? Believing a survivor, and intentionally looking for safer spaces for young people, right? This doesn't mean isolating them, but equipping them and empowering them to know that their wholeness matters and that there are people out there looking for vulnerabilities, right? That's a first honest conversation. Believing them and not hiding it, right? Not being fearful of it, but also engaging in a healthy conversation around what happens, you know, when people look for these vulnerabilities and decide to manipulate them or perpetrate on them. if you feel like somebody does need help, here's where I say, I'm kind of cautious and saying, pick up the phone and call 911. If someone's experiencing needed help, please use your best judgment. But because of the dynamics that we know about trafficking, right? Because we know that the person that's trafficking them could be a family member. And because we want the young people, even if the young person is a survivor, to have empowerment and agency and choice in their journey, we want them to be supported to make a decision about what next steps look like for them. If they're under 18, if you are a mandated reporter, please, you've got to do what you have to do. I'm not telling you to throw that to the side, because mandated reporting is a different space. But if you have the opportunity to empower the person, my suggestion is to connect them with an organization that works with survivors. In the Detroit area, you have WC Safe, which I think is Avalon Healing Center now. You have Alternatives for Girls. You have Vista Maria and the Alabaster Gift. I'm assuming all of you are in the Detroit area. Maybe not. We know that these programs work particularly and specifically with survivors of trafficking. The Human Trafficking Hotline is another great resource. This is not a resource where a survivor can disclose or get help from an advocate, but resources for law enforcement or anything of that nature. And we will send these to you, Caitlin, so you can share them with folks, or Tony. So please don't feel like you have to scramble and write them. We can share these resources. We also have the Michigan Coalition to End the Sexual Assault Hotline, which is 855 Voices 4. University of Michigan has a human trafficking clinic. If you are working with migrants, the Michigan Migrant Resource Councils offers some supports. And there's a database that you can get more information on, and we'll send out these resources. So we encourage you to connect with an agency that works with people who have experienced trauma. I don't encourage you to try and work through it on your own, only because it's very nuanced, right? And a trafficking survivor needs lots of resources. So I know it's a little bit over 3. I want to leave some space for some questions if folks have questions. And then I'm also going to put in our website. And on it, there's a human trafficking tab with more resources for you to see and read more about. So to summarize, trafficking, we're looking for an action, means, and purpose, right? And when we're talking to somebody, we want to kind of understand what are the dynamics of their relationship and where might force, fraud, or coercion exist based on their situation, circumstances, or the wholeness of that person. And if you suspect you are working with someone who's experiencing trafficking, one of your local agencies or the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence, through that site, we have our talk and text feature that a survivor can connect directly with an advocate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. We're always open. And we have trained advocates to walk through the situation with a survivor or you, if you feel like you are meeting or talking to a survivor or someone needs help. Remember to ask open-ended, non-judgmental questions. Remember, the internet is not a horrible tool. Many young people say it's a tool that helps them have a sense of community. Helping them with common sense safety, such as not sharing personal information, is important, but also helping them know that not everyone in virtual land is their friend, right? And examining that relationship is important. This is foundational information. If you would like more information or would like to speak to Falguna or I, we are going to put our, Falguna, I'm going to put our information. Falguna, will you type your email in there? Thank you, Kurt. Yeah. Thank you, Anna. If you'd like more information or if you have any questions, we are available to you anytime. Feel free to email. And then we'll also take any, if anyone has any burning questions, we'll take them now too.
Do you talk to youth? Do you have youth groups and give this education to like the teenagers and adolescents? Tell
So
them what
we have, yeah, we have a team that does prevention work. So in the science of prevention, how we approach this in terms of healthy relationships and looking at other ways that we approach our prevention work, we absolutely do engage with young people. Yeah. The hotline number, 855 voices 4. I think we'll put it in there. And then if you go through our web, or just our website, there is a chat and talk feature that you can go through our site. And then there's a text number on there too, if a young person wants to text. Or you. I keep saying young people, but anybody really. And it's confidential, so they don't have to disclose anything. You don't have to disclose anything. You can get connected to service or just some talk support. You're welcome.
Do you guys have any other questions?
I think we're gonna just put that number in the chat there, and you're welcome. Welcome, everyone.
Okay, then we will wrap this up for today. Thank you so much, you guys. Awesome presentation, fabulous information. It's very good perspective. Just think of it in terms of what are the dynamics of the relationship that you're referring to, you know, what are the dynamics of that relationship, and let that be your red flag signals to say, huh, that doesn't sound, let me probe a little further, you know, because it doesn't
Absolutely.
indicate they don't wear a costume that is identifiable, you know. All righty then.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you get a hold of us. Stay in touch if you need any more supports or information. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you guys for coming, and thank you guys for joining, and we will see you all next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Is there another one next week, or is this the last one?
Bye.
Yes, they'll be going through our April.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you so much, Tony.
You're welcome. Wrong mouse here.
Tony, Caitlin, if